So yeah, here we go. Planting a pollinator paradise with Trees Atlanta as part of Atlanta Science Festival 2021. And here I created a little cartoon pollinator paradise, what in my head looks like a pollinator paradise out there in the wild. So again, I'm with Trees Atlanta. I'm gonna first talk a little bit about what we do, but this is one of our programs in partnership with the Atlanta Science Festival. So we're very happy that they were able to offer this, offer the festival virtually this year. Very excited to be a part of it. And thank you all for joining us. It's a great time of year to be returning outdoors and exploring some of our urban environment, our urban forest, if you're in Atlanta, or learning about some of your flora and fauna that you've got wherever you may be. So Trees Atlanta is an environmental nonprofit. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly. And we have three parts to our mission. If there are any students out there, just like how your mission when you go to school every day is to learn so that you can be super smart when you grow up and be able to be a good citizen, contribute to society, get a good job, make some money for yourself, support yourself, your family, your friends, all of that. So our mission has three parts, like I mentioned, and you can read it up there. It's growing, protecting, and educating. So here's a picture for each one of those parts of our mission. We are heavily volunteer-based. We have a lot of volunteers, spend a lot of hours every year planting trees, mostly trees, sometimes small shrubs or sometimes grasses, but mostly trees. Right now, we are able to plant about 5,000 or 6,000 trees every single year, and we could not do it without our volunteers. So here are two volunteers right after planting a little tree right there. And then we protect. So I actually wanted to get the chat involved here. Can anyone guess, without looking it up, how many trees we have planted since we started in 1985? So about 36 years. How many trees do you think we have planted? I cannot pull up the chat. Any guesses? There it is. Okay. 2,180,000. It's a lot of zeros, Carla. 5 million, 3 million, 70,000, 100K, 2. Some of you were close. It is 140,000. And I did a little bit of math yesterday. I had some campers with me who were about 8 years old. So that roughly works out to about 14 or 15 trees every single day that an 8-year-old has been alive. So since their birth, that's like planting about 14 or 15 trees every single day. And that's a lot of trees, right? So that's why we need our volunteers, because there's only like 40 of us. There's no way that we could do that on our own. It would take all year to plant 5,000 or 6,000 trees every year. Yeah, and so the second part is protecting. Here is a picture of that youth tree team that I mentioned. These are high schoolers that I helped mentor one summer, and they are pulling some weeds from a green space so that surrounding plants can have more water and more soil nutrients and room for their roots to grow, because weeds will take those away from native plants and trees that we otherwise would prefer to have those water and nutrients. And then the third thing is what I'm doing right now. It's what you see here in this last picture. We educate, and we have a big emphasis on education, doing things like what I'm doing right now, because it's a lot of trees and there's a lot of work to be done. And like I said, there's only so many of us. So we need people's help like yourselves to do this kind of work. You need to know how to plant a tree, where to plant it, when to plant it, and you need to know what trees need in order to thrive in our urban forest. Like why you weed, what you should weed, what you shouldn't weed, when to water, when maybe not to water. And then things like the Atlanta Tree Ordinance, the policies that sort of dictate when people can and can't cut down trees. So we visit people in classrooms, we visit people online, we have adults come to us online or in person to learn all kinds of things so that you can help us do this kind of work and get involved in your community's trees. So moving on, let's see. Yep. So a big part of plant life is what's about to ensue on us pretty soon is pollen. The pollen season is nigh upon us. And so today we're going to be talking about a pollinator paradise and taking a bunch of different ideas and trying to connect them into a pretty cohesive understanding of the role that pollen plays in our environment, what we can do to support it, and why we should care. All right, but first we're going to get into some of the basics so that we are all on the same page before we start talking about what we people can do. So we'll start with the question, what is pollen? Would anyone like to guess in the chat or tell me what pollen is? Just briefly, if you happen to know. Not sure why the chat doesn't want to come up for me. Well, if you're typing in the chat, I can't see it because my computer doesn't want to pull the chat up. So I'm sorry.
We've got somebody saying that pollen and them do not agree, and another person is saying part of a plant that grows in the spring, tree dust. Someone else is saying it fertilizes seeds and is a fertilizer. And I think that's all we got right now.
Okay, awesome. All of those are pretty much true, especially
all
the
that yellow stuff that stays on plants.
Yeah, and on cars and on roads. It's everywhere, right? It does not agree with me either. You know, the more you learn about pollen, the more you love it, but it doesn't mean that my eyes stop itching. My eyes drive me crazy in the spring. I definitely have to take some medicine sometimes. But yeah, all of that is correct. And we're going to get into that right now. What is pollen, right? We sneeze, our eyes itch, our throats itch, and then everything turns yellow. A lot of people have to wash their cars a lot more frequently if they have to leave their cars outside in the spring. It can be kind of a nuisance, to be honest. And when I was a kid, I didn't really understand what it was and why it made me feel so bad. I guess it was just part of life, but I definitely resented it because it drove me crazy, and it still kind of does. But it's more than just a nuisance. It's actually one of nature's, in my opinion, great miracles, and it's actually an integral part of life on Earth. There's actually a lot that wouldn't be the way it is if we didn't have pollen. So what is it specifically? Someone said that it grows on flowers. You are correct. It's a tiny yellow powder. Tree dust is a great description for it. A lot of people, when I ask this question, especially students, I ask them where it comes from, and they think that bees make it because they associate bees with pollen. And here you do have a bee covered in pollen. But no, it's actually made by flowers. It's made by plants. A lot of different, not all plants, but a lot of plants produce flowers, and those flowers will make this pollen stuff. And it kind of grows. We'll get into a little flower anatomy in a second, but it grows on parts of the flower that are usually in the middle of the flower, in the middle of the petals. But why? Why do they do that? So here's our flower anatomy. We have, I'm not gonna overburden you or overinform you with all of this stuff, but there are two major parts of the flower that we need to look at. So here you have your stem with your leaf, right? And then off of the stem grows a flower. So you might recognize that. Usually we pay attention to the petals because they're pretty, but in the middle, there are usually these kind of antenna looking things that all have different purposes. And so the two that we're going to pay attention to are the stamen, which is this right here. And this is the part of the flower that makes pollen. That is what produces the pollen. And then when the pollen is made, it goes up here to the anther. So you can see these stamen have anthers of their own at the top. And if I go back a slide, this would be the anther right here where the pollen is. And then the red tubes leading up to the anther, that would be the stamen. And then the pistil. So when that pollen is on the anther, and then it somehow reaches the pistil right here, which is in the middle. They look very similar, but the pistil is usually bigger. When that pollen reaches the pistil, it will go down this little tube into the ovary. And inside the ovary is, well, it's not a seed yet. It's an ova. But when that pollen reaches the ovary, that seed that's in there will actually start turning into a seed. And so that's generally how pollination works from the pollen side. And it doesn't have to be on the same plant. Sometimes it can't be on the same plant. And it's actually not great if it's on the same plant. It's better for biodiversity and what's called genetic diversity if you cross-pollinate, meaning pollen from one anther will make it to the pistil of a completely different plant, of the same species, but a separate individual plant. And then, I'm not sure if you guys knew, I explained this to a student yesterday, but when that happens, when the ovary gets the pollen and the seed starts developing, well, where do we usually find seeds next, right? If you've ever eaten an apple, you know that the seeds are in the middle. So what happens to the flower is that when it's pollinated, is that the petals will usually fall off, and then that seed will start growing a fruit around it. And the purpose of that fruit, you know, the purpose for us buying apples is to eat them. But what about the plant? The plant does that because the seed eventually will need to grow into a new plant, right? But it may not be ready yet. So it grows this fruit, this fleshiness around it to basically act like a pillow so that when it falls down, it has a nice hard pillow around it to protect it. But then we also know that apples are full of sugar, full of juices. They taste really, really good. A lot of other fruit too. And that's because the seed, when it can grow into a plant, it kind of needs its own sugar and it needs its own water to develop into a new plant when the seed is ready to germinate and start growing. And so all those nutrients, the vitamin C that we talk about when it comes to fruit, all of those things that are in an apple that we enjoy also help an apple seed grow into a new apple tree. So from the plant side, that's kind of how things work. Any questions about that so far? Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. Oh, there's the chat. If there are any questions, I'm able to read them now. All right. Going once, going twice. Sold. So moving on. How does pollen move? And I just looked at the chat. Someone said wind. You are correct. We're going to talk about 3 different ways today. All right. So in our pollinator paradise that we're painting in our heads, we now have flowers, right? We talked about flowers and it's springtime. Pollen is starting to fill the air. So in our pollinator paradise, we've got tons of flowers with yellow pollen growing out of the stamen. But how does it move? You know, we talked about how it's good that that the pollen will go from one plant to another plant. If we're talking about phlox, which I mentioned before, which is the type of plant that those who registered beforehand will be able to pick up, one phlox flower and its pollen will need to get that pollen to another one for the ideal situation. But how does that happen? See, someone said wind. You are correct. We have pollinators, aka animals. We'll talk about some specific ones. The second one is wind. And the third is people, us. And so we'll talk a little bit about that too. But pollen needs to move, and it gets a little help from a group of animals that we call pollinators. Can anyone guess what some pollinators are? What are some animals that you might think of as pollinators? This chat is driving me crazy.
I can read
Yeah.
it. So,
Okay.
a lot of people are saying bees, butterflies, ants, wasps, birds, hummingbirds.
Yeah, those are all great
Ladybugs.
ones. Yeah, all correct. Very good. You guys know your stuff a little bit already.
Bats.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting a little in depth now. Those are all correct. There's a lot of flying insects and bugs that serve as pollinators. So here you have a little dragonfly, a butterfly, and a bee as well. And you can see definitely on the bee that it's starting to get covered in pollen. And what happens is when these bees or these butterflies or these dragonflies go to eat the nectar, maybe not. Oh, did I say nectar? I meant to say pollen. I was trying to trick you. Yeah, sorry. They go for the nectar that a flower grows, right? We commonly know about flower nectar, and bees like to drink it up. A butterfly has what's called a proboscis, and other bugs have it too. It's basically a straw that is their mouth that they can curl up, and it goes like this, if you can see my camera. And it's nice and long, so they can stick it down into the part of the flower that produces and carries the nectar. And that's because nectar is sort of like, us eating honey or drinking a sugary drink. It's got a lot of sugar in it. If you've ever had too much Gatorade or too much Coke or Sprite or something like that, you get a little hyper, right? You get a sugar rush. And so these pollinators depend on this nectar for energy. And with this energy, they can fly around, they get energy just to live. But then a pollinator like the honeybee will actually take the nectar back. They actually have part of their body, they actually have like a little pouch where they can keep nectar stored. So they'll drink a little for themselves for energy, and then they'll keep a little bit stored in their body. It kind of weighs them down because they can get a lot. And then they'll fly it back to the hive and then use it to make honey. Yeah. I will say, actually, no, I'm going to get to that in a second. So moving on. So someone said hummingbirds. You are correct. Hummingbirds are fascinating creatures. Their nice, long, needle-like beaks are kind of like the butterfly's proboscis. It's nice and long. Sometimes flowers are small or have small openings. And so they really rely on that beak shape and that beak size to reach the nectar. And we know that hummingbirds flap really, really, really fast. I used to know how many flaps per minute they're able to do, and their heart rate, but it's sky high. It's like 1,000 flaps per minute or something like that. It's kind of crazy how fast they move. And so that means they burn a lot of energy. So they are, especially during springtime when the flowers are out, they are constantly looking for flowers to get nectar from. Oop. And then some beetles and other bugs are also great pollinators. I'm not sure exactly what kind of beetle this is, but beetles are interesting because they don't typically go for nectar. I think some do, but they do go to eat the pollen itself. And that's because pollen has a lot of protein in it. So there are some flowering trees, the magnolia tree is an example, that rely on beetles to pollinate them. And that's because those flowers don't actually make nectar. So there's no reason for like a butterfly or a bee to land on the magnolia flowers because there's no nectar. But beetles and magnolia trees have what's called co-evolved. They basically grew up together over millions of years and helped each other out. The magnolia tree will give pollen to the beetles for food full of protein. Good, it's a good snack for the beetle. And in the process, you know, the beetle will eat some pollen, but as you can see, get some other pollen dust, some other tree dust caught on its body, and it will drop some of that off in another flower as it continues to snack. And then bats. I'm glad someone said bats, because bats are commonly overlooked. Not a lot of people know that bats are big pollinators. Bats are incredible animals. They happen to be my spirit animal, if you're familiar with that concept. They are great pest control. They are just super interesting. They're the only flying mammal. They are nocturnal. They're very social. They live in huge colonies, and they are great pollinators. If you like some more tropical foods, or a lot of foods that grow in the Southwest, like avocados and mangoes, and down at like things that grow down in Mexico, or I think guava as well, if you like guava. But
Andrew,
yeah.
there's a question of what plants can we plant to attract bats specifically? You mentioned some that we can't plant here, but how about here?
Yeah, so our local bat species are not pollinators. There are no plants around the Atlanta area or in the Southeast, to my knowledge, that bats will seek out for nectar or pollen. A lot of those plant species and bat species, a lot of that coevolution took place in different climates. So there's not much around here, but there is a lot you can do to support bats, because they do a lot of great pest control for us. If you've ever been out to the urban food forest at Brown's Mill, I can take a quick aside and explain that to you. If you haven't heard of it or been to it, it is right now the United States, the biggest urban food forest in the entire United States. It is in Atlanta. It is a public park, so you can go to it whenever you want. It is about 7 acres in size, and it's being Trees Atlanta is helping to manage it. So we got a lot of activity out there. There are raised garden beds. There's a fruit orchard. There's an actual forest with a lot of food producing trees. But there's also a creek that runs through it, and we're trying to restore the creek because the water was pretty dirty. There's a lot of litter and pollution in it. So we're working on that. But as a result, there's a lot of standing water. So we had a huge mosquito problem. And so for his Eagle Scout project, a young Boy Scout came out and built, I think, 5 bat boxes. And a bat box is basically like a skinny wooden box that you nail up to a tree. And it's designed in such a way to be a great home for a colony of bats. I think it's becoming actually a pretty popular thing for people to put up in parks, because those bats come in and a bat can eat like 60 mosquitoes in a single minute. If they find a swarm of mosquitoes, they can eat them right up. So they're great pest control. They're an important part of the food web, which is a concept that we are going to explore. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the question. The name of the Food Forest Park is, I'll answer this live and I'll put it in the chat. It's the Urban Food Forest at Browns Mill. It's in the Browns Mill Lakewood neighborhood. You guys can look it up. It is a community food forest. Meaning that what's produced, so there's a little, I don't know the age range that we have here, but for those who might be familiar with the phrase sweat equity, typically the produce that is grown there is preferably allocated to neighbors and those who volunteer and put their time in there. So if you do go out there, I would ask you to not pick much, maybe taste a couple of things if there's stuff growing out there, but a lot of things are labeled. So if you're going to go out there, have that in mind. But you can walk around, there's trails, there's bat boxes, there's a nice creek. The creek is actually in pretty good shape at this point. Yeah, there's a couple beehives as well, called apiaries. One of them is actually active right now. I was there just a few days ago. So yeah, it's a great place to check out. A lot of history there too. It used to be an old horse farm with a pecan orchard. So there's some really, really big pecan trees there. So if you go at the right time of year, you can get a ton of pecans. Yeah, brief aside, sorry. So yeah, bats. Bats are great pollinators, just not in Atlanta, unfortunately. It'd be really cool if they were, because then we'd probably be able to see some cool things when a bat would visit a flower. Yeah. All right. So those are some examples of pollinators. There's some others. People said wasps, ants, ladybugs are big ones. Yeah, a lot of flying bugs and insects, and some other bird species too are great pollinators. So there's a lot of them out there. And I want you to remember that there are a lot of animals and insects and bugs that rely on this nectar stuff for the majority of their food supply for most of the year. But why? I may have already answered this. Yeah, food, right? Food, nectar, and pollen itself. We talked about beetles eating pollen for protein. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, sorry. One other thing I wanted to mention though is that, honeybees, they go to flowers and collect nectar. I got just a couple fun facts about honeybees. And they bring the nectar back and they will deposit or drop that nectar off into one of the hexagons inside the honeycomb, right? And then I don't know if you know this, but nectar is kind of watery, but it's full of sugar. It's kind of like tree sap. It's pretty watery. So it's not honey yet. I might gross you out here with this, but before they actually put the nectar into the honeycomb, they actually regurgitate it or throw it up into another bee's mouth. And then they do that back and forth a few times. And that's a really important part of the process because our saliva, the stuff in our mouth, has enzymes, what are called enzymes. There's things in our spit that help break food down. It's a very important part of the way that we eat. Same thing with bees. They have things in their mouth that when it mixes with the nectar, it starts to break it down and starts turning it into honey. So honey wouldn't be, if you like honey wouldn't be what it is without bees doing that. And then when it's ready, they put it into the honeycomb and then they turn around and flap their wings really, really, really fast. And that basically creates a fan. And that fan blows a lot of air over the nectar and helps the rest of the water to dry out of the honey. And then they seal it with wax. And then after a couple months, I think, the honey is ready and they can eat that honey all winter long. When they go into, they don't hibernate, they just like stay in their hive and eat honey all winter to stay alive. Another fun fact, if you know what a queen bee is, if you've ever seen a queen bee compared to the rest of the bees, like the worker bees, the queen bee is much larger, right? And that doesn't just happen on its own. Some bees will get some nectar and some pollen from a flower. I think I have a picture in a little bit that shows a bee putting pollen in what's called a pollen basket. It's part of their leg. If you ever go out and look at bees flying around flowers, you'll see some bees with like big knots of yellow on their legs. And that's actually pollen that they've like shoved into the pocket. It's basically a pocket in their leg where they store pollen. And so they bring the nectar and the pollen back and they mix it together. And when they mix it together, they make what we call royal jelly. It's kind of this jelly stuff. And I've said that pollen has protein in it, nectar has sugar. When you mix those two together, it's quite a feast. And it's called royal jelly because only the queen eats it. And because the queen eats it and everyone else doesn't, That's how they get to be so big. Their bodies are just like jacked up on royal jelly and get really large. There's a question. Does pollen help seeds grow? Yes. Yeah, so we can go back to what pollen does for a plant, right? When the flower makes pollen and the bee comes along, drinks some nectar, and gets a little pollen on its shoulder on accident, and then flies to the next flower, and then some of that pollen on the shoulder drops off, falls off into that second flower, that pollen will fall into the flower. And that is when inside the flower are little things that become seeds. So that pollen will fall into the flower, onto the seed, and only then, only when that happens is when seeds can start to grow into bigger seeds. And then they grow a fruit around them. The fruit falls to the ground, it rots, and then the seed will grow into a new plant. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. So yeah, that is why. Do a quick time check. Perfect. So the other way that pollen moves, I know we were on pollinators for a while because we're talking about a pollinator paradise and there's a lot to explore there. But yeah, the second one is wind. So here's a picture of some wind blowing some catkins, which are essentially what a conifer will grow. And you can see the wind is blowing strong enough to blow an entire cloud of pollen off of that tree. And that's because not all flowers make a whole lot of pollen. There are a lot of tree species out there who depend on wind. They won't be visited by pollinators. And so they depend on the wind. They make a lot more pollen because if you think about it, it's a lot more accurate or precise. If a bee will pick up some pollen and you can depend on it going to another flower. When the wind blows the pollen, do you think that pollen is going to go right where it needs to go? Does it have control over that? Can pollen steer itself? No, it kind of just depends on where the wind's blowing, right? So it relies more on luck, which is why there is so much pollen in this air. By creating so much pollen, it raises the chances that at least one of those pollen specks, one of those pieces of tree dust, will land on the flower of another tree or another. So this is a conifer on another conifer that will help that grow into a cone. And then people. So we have what's called hand pollination. And so what you see here, it looks like someone's painting the flower. Not quite. There are, and this happens in a lot of orchards when people want to be like really careful about which pollen from which tree goes to the next tree. And that's because in order to grow like a gala apple or a Fuji apple or a specific type of banana or a clementine, you don't want wild apple that's out in the woods. You don't want wild apple pollen to come from an apple tree and blow into your orchard. Because if that happens, then you'll mix that natural tree that's out in the woods somewhere with what's supposed to be like your gala apple tree, right? So you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so what you do is you take, I've seen people use a lot of different things. A paintbrush, you can use a toothpick, a cotton swab. You can pick up some pollen from one flower just by brushing it. And then you go to another flower, maybe to another tree's flower, and you drop that pollen off, just like that. It's very time consuming, but it does help us control what those flowers will turn into. And so a lot of the fruit that we eat is actually produced this way. It provides really good jobs for people. There's a lot of benefits to it. But that being said, I have that question there. What about the bees? And I want to get some people involved in the chat. Do all birds pollinate? No, not all birds pollinate, especially not the big ones. Like eagles definitely do not pollinate. They're way too big. But certain bird species that have long beaks and are relatively small, you collect the pollen in a container. I'm not an expert on hand pollination, so I'm not really sure. My understanding is that they just go from flower to flower over and over again, but it would make sense if you could collect a bunch of pollen in a jar and use that. It probably would go a lot faster, but I'm not sure. That's a great question. But yeah, small birds will pollinate. So back to my question. Thank you guys for asking really good questions. I'm having fun. How would hand pollination affect the bees? How would hand pollination affect bees? You guys can try and answer that in the chat if you have any theories or hypotheses. And I am able to see the chat right now. Job thievery. That's actually pretty accurate. There's not as much nectar for them. It limits the amount of pollen they can carry. Bees would die or not come out. A lot of these are on the right track. It makes them sad. Yeah, I think if bees are capable of feeling emotions, it definitely makes them sad. They won't be necessary, so flowers may not do things to attract them. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought. Decrease bee population. Yeah, I guess if this happened long enough, the flowers would adapt, because flowers are the colors that they are to attract bees, right? Or to attract pollinators. You have a big tree with a bunch of green leaves. If the flowers are green, it might not be as easy for pollinators to see them. So that's why they grow flowers the color that they are. They're nice and bright. So they're easy to pick out, and they're very attractive. So I guess if you hand pollinated enough trees for long enough, and we're talking like thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years, then maybe they would stop producing flowers that were brightly colored. Yeah, that's an interesting thought though. But yeah, people are saying decreased bee populations, the bees would die or not come back, limits the amount of pollen they can carry. These are pretty forest. Yeah, hopefully they'll stay pretty. Yeah. But what do we know about what pollen does to a flower? It basically turns the flower into a fruit, right? Does a fruit still have nectar in it for pollinators? No, the flower's gone, the nectar's gone. All the juices, all the sugar and all that, it's trapped inside the skin of the fruit, right? So things like worms can get in, if you've ever had a wormy apple, but bees have no way of getting in, butterflies have no way of getting in. So if we hand pollinate enough flowers, then suddenly we're taking nectar and pollen away from the beetles, away from the bees. So they have they don't have a job to do anymore, because basically the work has literally dried up, and they don't have flowers to visit anymore. But they also do not have a food supply, right? Because they need that nectar to make honey or to feed their bodies. So what are they going to do? What do people do when work dries up and they don't have food? They leave, right? So bees, yeah, they'll move on. Or what if there's nowhere to move on to? They might die. So there's been some studies out there about what's going on with bee populations and how hand pollination might be influencing that. It's not on a huge scale, but it is something to consider when we're talking about when people get involved with pollination. So moving on, kind of need to move a little bit quicker, I think. This happens to me sometimes. I just start talking and and get on really interesting tangents. But now let's talk about why we should care. Why should we care? Why do we care about bees? Why do we care about all our pollinators and the flowers? We might have empathy for bees. We want them to have jobs. We want them to have food. But that doesn't really mean that we can't go to the store ourselves, right? Get whatever we want, or does it? Why should we care? Why should we be like these high schoolers and go out and pull weeds and protect the urban forest? Food, right? We've talked a lot about how these animals need flowers for nectar and pollen, but we also know that these flowers will turn into fruit. Has anyone ever fed a horse an apple? They love apples. A lot of animals love fruit. Deer love acorns, which come from oak flowers that were pollinated by something, usually the wind. And not just deer, raccoons, turkey, squirrels. So many animals rely on this pollination process for their food. Those fruit that they eat have to come from somewhere. Those seeds that they eat have to come from somewhere, right? But then us too. Like we might be able to get some hand pollinated apples, but not all the produce that we eat comes from hand pollinated trees and other plants. We definitely rely on pollinators. Then we also know that, we haven't really covered this, but trees and plants do a lot more for us than just give us food, right? You might have learned about how they clean our air. They help filter and clean our water supply. They cool our city off in our hot summers. Even out in Arizona, I'm sure you have some hot, hot days, right? And in an urban setting, which is a city, you have a lot more streets, you have a lot more buildings, you have a lot more people, a lot more cars. So you have a lot of pollution coming up into the air, creating sometimes smog. And then you also have a lot of like black top surfaces, like streets, or artificial surfaces like metals, glass. And what this does, all of these things I just said, they create what's called a heat island. It's why Atlanta sometimes will be some like 5 degrees hotter than it is 20 miles outside the city. So sometimes you can look on your phone's weather app, compare temperatures, and even like 20 miles away, it'll be 5 degrees cooler if you're in Atlanta. And one of the best ways to combat that, to solve that problem, and it is a problem because that can lead to health effects for people. So especially in our hot Atlanta summer, it can lead to overheating, dehydration, respiratory issues, so breathing issues for people, which can end up causing a lot of problems for a lot of people. So to address this issue, you can plant more trees and plants, right? But you can also allow trees and plants to grow on their own, right? We know that those flowers will turn into fruit and drop, and the seeds will grow new plants. But they need pollinators, right? So if our pollinators are healthy and happy, they have food to eat, they're flying around, that means that we are going to have more plants starting to grow naturally in the woods. And so those trees and plants will grow naturally and help keep our city cooler and healthier to live in. And then food webs is why we should care. Pollinators will eat everything they can from a flower, but some animals eat pollinators and need to eat pollinators. So we talk a lot about food chains. A common one is shark eats medium-sized fish, eats small fish, eats plankton, so on and so forth, right? It's like a line that you can draw. Usually things are a little bit more complex than that. Like this plant here feeds 3 different animals: a caterpillar, a bird, and a chipmunk, and the butterfly. And then all of these things will feed some larger animals. And so it's called a food web because if, let's take away our plant, let's say our plant dies for whatever reason, that's 4 animals that no longer get their food, that no longer have anything to get their food from. And so they go away, or they die. And then look, the fox has nothing left to eat anymore because the bird didn't have a plant to eat, the chipmunk didn't have a plant to eat. So now the fox doesn't have anything to eat. And then you can look at anything here. If same thing with the caterpillar and the butterfly, if the frog doesn't have those to eat, then it can't feed, it's not there. It can't feed the snake, and it can't feed the eagle. So understanding the pollination process and making sure we have flowers and fruit for animals to eat is an important part of protecting even the bigger animals in our food web that we have around. So what can we do? Start wrapping it up. What can we do? Any ideas in the chat? Your love plants in the garden. Yep. We have deer problems out at the urban food forest of Browns Mill. Sometimes you'll see like the hoof prints inside the garden beds. So grow a garden, grow more plants, eat more fruit and veggies, plant more flowers. Stop using toxic chemicals. Nice. That's a big one. So I'm seeing a lot of questions in the Q&A. I'll get to those at the end. Don't kill bees because you're scared. Plant native seeds and nuts. Plant trees. Yeah, all of these are great ideas. And I have a few ideas that I'm going to share with you, and it's definitely not all the ideas, all the things that you can do, but it's some of the big ones. So what can we do? Well, we can leave pollinators alone, right? So stop killing bees. I know there are some times when you need to get rid of a beehive if it's like in a public park near a lot of people and people are getting stung. That might be an appropriate time to get rid of a beehive, but a lot of people will just get rid of it even if it's not really threatening because they have a fear that it could become a problem, right? But if we understand the importance of some of these pollinators and how they're tied to our lives and our ecosystems, then maybe we'll have a little empathy for them and allow and just give them their space, let them do their thing, because what they're doing is super important. And we can study ecosystem health. So someone said stop using toxic chemicals. So yeah, definitely stop using herbicides and pesticides on our lawns, because that stuff doesn't just go away automatically. Sometimes it stays in the soil. Sometimes some pollinators will come along after you sprayed something, try and get a snack, and then that pesticide or herbicide will get in their bodies and that can make them really sick or kill them, or maybe they'll even take it back to their hive or to their home and get other, and if a bee has pesticide in its nectar and it's trying to make honey and it throws up that nectar into another bee, well then now that bee's got poison in its body too. So it's really important to understand the other consequences of using those chemicals. And then we can studying our ecosystem health is a huge part of this process of supporting our environment. How many pollinators are there? Pollinator survey, they're called surveys, where people go out and literally count how many pollinators they're seeing. A lot of these projects involve a lot of people, so a lot of volunteers will go out, spend a whole day counting bees or butterflies. How many flowers? How many flowers? It's important to understand or know how many flowers are in a given space and in a given park 1 year, because let's say 10 years later, you've been counting every year. What if the number starts to go down? And if you have that information, then you can say, whoa, there's a lot fewer flowers this year than there were 10 years ago. Why is that happening? What can we do about it? And then you can see if pollen or nectar is contaminated, maybe how some other chemicals, it's not always pesticides or herbicides. Sometimes it's pollution from cars or factories, other industries that can get into the soil And then a plant will absorb some of those contaminants, some of that pollution, and it'll get in, the pollution will get into the tree's body and maybe into the pollen or the nectar. So it's definitely important to support science and maybe get into it yourself, to try and support the studies that are very, very important to this work. And we can reduce deforestation, so stop cutting down trees. Deforestation is a huge issue. It does more than just, harm our pollinator populations. Things get hotter, right? Because we no longer have the trees to shade. Our air has fewer trees to clean it. All kinds of things, erosion, so soil washes away, and all of that affects animal life as well. But that's a whole nother topic. And then 4, we can plant, right? People are saying plant a garden, grow a garden. Yes, we can stop cutting things down, but we can also add to it ourselves. So here we have that same picture of our volunteers planting a tree. The more that people plant, the more flowers that our plants will produce for our pollinators, right? And then so there are some questions about like what to plant and when to plant. Those are great questions, because I probably don't want to go to the store and get some Japanese flowering plant that could end up becoming an invasive species where we live, right? We have a lot of invasive species in Atlanta already that are not bad plants, like kudzu. It does fine in Japan. It's people that made the mistake of bringing it over, and now it's a little out of control. So you definitely want to find plants that are native to our region that grow really well here. But even down to like the micro level, when you're looking at where you're going to plant something, how much shade does that spot in the ground get? How much water does it get? Does it pool? Does it flood? Or does it drain really well? Does the water run off? Will that be the best spot for your plant? So there's a lot of things to consider. There are a lot of native flowering plants out there. Depending on your yard, you might need one species over another. It really depends. So I'm going to put that research on you, but those are some ideas to consider. And there's a lot of great information on our website that you can find to help you with that. And even just Googling good plants for partial shade or good plants for 2 hours of sunlight at a time, like each day. I mean, there are some, like in the Southeast, like good results will come up. So next steps, if you are one of our people who registered for this event ahead of time, where there were 50 of you, you can come pick up your plant. And so I have your emails. I will be sending you an email with an address and a couple time slots for you to swing by our office and pick them up. They are being delivered tomorrow. So yeah, you can come pick them up in just a little bit. I will be making a video demonstration for you for how to plant it. We are getting what's called phlox. It's a phlox plant. So in that video demonstration, I will also show you a good spot that could help your plant thrive a little bit more. All right, so we're talking like how much shade it gets, what kind of water drainage, things like that. And then I'll actually plant one for you and show you how I would do it. Then you can find more plants, right? If you're not getting a free plant from us, you can go find plants yourself. Some people can buy, you can buy them, you can buy seeds for them. You can even go find seeds out in the wild, out in the woods, and bring them back and find a good place in your yard. Because contrary to popular belief, as many seeds as trees produce, usually only a few actually successfully grow into new trees. So oak trees might make thousands of acorns every year, but only like 3 or 4 of them will actually succeed in growing into new trees. So if you find one on the ground and you want to take it back and plant it, see if it grows like in a pot or something, it's okay to pick up a few acorns. Not a big deal. Picking a good planting spot in your yard or neighborhood. Again, it depends on what you're planting. Trees are like us. They prefer different things. Some people are morning people, some people are night owls. Some people love to go to the beach, some people love to go to the mountains. Plants are the same, they have different preferences and they grow in different ways. Keep learning, don't stop. There's a lot to learn about the plant world, a lot to learn about our environment and what trees can do for us, and how they can help us solve the climate change crisis as well. So the more we know, the more we can do, the more we can get involved. So please keep learning. That's a fascinating world to learn about. And then teach others. You know, like I'm teaching you, and the hope is that you can help us do this work now by both doing it, but also inviting your friends to come help you plant, or helping your friend figure out how they can start their own pollinator garden at home as well. All right, so questions. I'm gonna go to the Q&A now. I think I have a few I need to answer. Learn, teach, and yes, volunteer for sure. We teach you all kinds of things when you come volunteer with us. Leave room for tree roots to grow as big as the canopy top. Yeah, that's a big, you have to think about how wide the root system's gonna get. If you did not pre-register and just dropping in, I do not have a phlox for you, unfortunately. That was a budget constraint. I can only get 50 plants. So sorry about that. All right. How many flowers do you need to plant? The more, the better. But you do have to realize that depending on where you're planting things, you don't want to plant them too close to each other. You don't want to plant too many plants in a given area. It is possible to do that because there might not be enough water or nutrients in the soil for all of the plants. But definitely start out with a few if you can. The more, the better, right? We know that. The more flowers we have, the healthier our ecosystem, because we're just going to keep the pollinators coming, keep them going. In urban areas, are bees seeking different sources of sugar, like around trash cans? Yeah. They definitely will look for sugar almost anywhere. If you ever had like a soda can and a bee flies in it, that's happened to me a couple times. And then I have to like pour it out and try and help the bee escape. But yeah, they'll go to something sweet pretty readily. It's not the best sugar for them, obviously, because it's usually processed. So we definitely want to be careful about what we just leave out for wildlife. What pollinators will the garden attract? So phlox, I believe, will attract a lot of bees and butterflies. I don't know the specific species of each off the top of my head, but I will share that information in the video. And if you're not getting phlox from me, I'll type that in the name of it. It's the Gina cultivar. If you're just curious about what that will attract, you can look it up and maybe find some for yourself. Do some plants harm bees? Yeah, I mean, there are some carnivorous plants like a Venus flytrap that will consume and eat some bugs and insects if they land on them. But to my knowledge, no. Only if a plant, maybe a plant is an invasive species from another continent, and maybe a bee cannot tolerate its nectar. Maybe it's bad for them. Like some berries here that grow on invasive species. So there's a plant called Nandina that comes from, I think, Japan. And it grows bright red berries that have arsenic in them. And birds in Japan they co-evolved, they grew up with this plant, so they can eat the berries just fine. But when we brought that over from Japan in the last like 50 or 100 years, our birds are not ready for that. So they'll go eat the berry, but if they eat too many, it can make them really, really sick. So it's possible that something like that could happen with bees. Is bamboo an invasive plant? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There's a native relative of bamboo. They're in the same family, but they were separated a long time ago, eons ago, millions and millions of years ago. So they're similar, but bamboo is definitely invasive. It comes from East Asia. But it's called river cane. River cane is a native relative of bamboo, and it definitely grows really well here. And so it's a good alternative if you like bamboo and the look of it or what it provides to a landscape. River cane is a good alternative. Yeah, bamboo will take over. Let's see. Is the scientific community working together with housing, planning, and development to help promote native plant species to neighborhoods? That is the goal. That is, I think, the ideal world. I think that it's not happening enough. I can't speak for the scientific community specifically. I know that the Warnell School of Forestry at the University of Georgia, we do a lot of partnership work with them. They have all kinds of models. They do all kinds of presentations. They do all kinds of consulting, especially with the city of Atlanta, on how to infuse urban planning policy with a lot of these concepts. But at the same time, you still go to new developments in Atlanta sometimes and see they planted a Chinese elm tree, which is not necessarily invasive, but it's not native. It doesn't really provide much for our ecosystem. It's just easy to take care of. So it's like cost effective for the developer to put it there. So it's clearly not happening enough. Yeah. But that's what Trees Atlanta is doing. We're trying to advocate for these ideas and these practices. Warnell School of Forestry is doing that. There's a lot of advocacy work and consulting going on, for sure. How old do you have to be to volunteer? I think in order to come by yourself, I think 16. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've led a volunteer project. But you can come with your parents at any age, pretty much any age. We do a lot of planting. You can come and work with our forest restoration department and remove invasive species from parks. It's pretty, let's say it builds character. We'll put it that way. But if you're interested, we're having a spring break camp and summer camp coming up. If you are old enough, if you're going to be in 7th through 12th grade next year, then you have aged out of camp and you can volunteer to be one of our junior interns. So if you're in that age range, then that works too. But there are all kinds of volunteer opportunities that you can find on our website. And that the definitive age, the definitive answer to that question will be on there. It's not coming to me off the top of my head. Is there something that can be put in policy-wise to promote native plants? Can there be something put in? Yes. Will there be? I'm not sure. Trees Atlanta has been working with the city of Atlanta to revamp and revise its tree ordinance. I'm trying to remember if there was anything. I'm sure in the draft that we submitted to them, there was language about natives for sure. I don't know if that made it into the city's final draft. But yeah, I mean, and there, some retailers still sell invasive plant species. So, that's something that can be done on the commercial side to prevent some invasives from being brought to market from that angle. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot to cover there. Can there be? Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think it's going to take a lot of advocacy and a lot of lobbying to make it happen. But I think there's enough environmental literacy starting to be churned out to the general populace to where I think it's viable. Yeah, budgets and aesthetics. Yeah, it's not going to be a hot topic politically until it's too late, potentially. So maybe we can try not to end on a dark note. So please come get your plant. please plant it. There's a lot that you can do to brighten our ecosystems, right? Literally with flowers. So please come get your plant or go buy some. If you want to come work with us, you can volunteer. We have spring break camp, April 5th through 9th. Campers can be first grade through sixth grade. For summer camp, rising first grade through sixth grade. So anyone who's in kindergarten through fifth right now, going into the next grade, next school year, they can be campers. And then I talked about the junior intern position. And if you want us to come to your school virtually or in person, get in contact with us. There are 2 education coordinators. I'm one of them. Sabrina Melendez is the other one. You can find our information on our website, our contact information. Email her because she heads up that program. There's our website, treesatlanta.org, and thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And attendees, if you don't mind, we would love to hear your feedback about the event. And I'm putting a link in the chat here. If you don't mind filling that out, we'll draw a name, maybe 10, 15 names for a $15 DoorDash gift card if you're able to give us a little bit of feedback. So we appreciate that. And thank you so much to Andrew.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's been a real pleasure. I hope you all have a great week and look out for an email from me about coming to pick up your plant.
Bye.
All right, bye everyone. Take care, y'all. Have a good one.